Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, we're stepping into the forest's invisible web, an underground internet built of roots, fungi, and time. Every tree you see is a node, every breath of soil a signal. They share food, warnings, and memory through threads thinner than hair, yet strong enough to bind whole ecosystems. Some trees nurture their young, others send alarms miles away. It's a slow-motion symphony of communication happening right beneath your feet, ancient, silent, alive. And while you're settling in, before your eyes grow too heavy, I'd love it if you gently tapped subscribe or pressed the little hype button YouTube recently added. It's a small click, but it helps keep these experiments and explorations orbiting out into the algorithm. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's oddly fascinating to see where people are drifting off with us, scattered across the world like stars across the galaxy. Now take a deep breath, let your day drift away, and let's travel together into the quiet corners of the universe. Beneath the surface of every forest lies a hidden architecture. It is not made of stone or steel, but of roots and filaments, woven in silence over millions of years. You cannot see it from above. You could walk through a forest every day of your life and never know it's there. And yet, it stretches for miles in every direction, a biological lattice buried in the dark. This is the wood wide web, the vast underground network that connects trees to one another, tree to tree, species to species, through the threads of ancient fungi. These fungi, known as mycorrhizal fungi, are older than forests themselves. Long before towering oaks or whispering pines reach toward the sky, these filaments were already colonizing the land. They are not roots, but they grow from them fine, white strands called hyphae, thinner than a human hair, branching outward like neural tendrils, threading through the soil. A single teaspoon of healthy forest earth can contain several miles of these threads, wrapped around roots, stretching between them, linking organisms into a single sprawling community. What they do, quietly and without pause, is nothing short of alchemy. These fungi tap into tree roots, forming tiny interfaces where their cells intertwine with those of the plant. Through this fusion, they exchange nutrients, carbon flows from the tree, and in return, the fungus delivers minerals like phosphorus and nitrogen drawn from the soil beyond the tree's reach. It is a trade that benefits both, a contract written not in ink but in chemistry. But the story doesn't end with nutrients. This is also how messages move. Signals passed not through sound or sight, but through living threads beneath the ground. When a tree is injured or attacked by pests, it doesn't suffer in silence. Releases compounds through its roots that flow into the fungal web. These signals ripple outward, reaching neighboring trees, triggering them to boost their own defenses, to thicken their bark, or release protective chemicals into their leaves. It is as if the trees are warning one another, not in words, but in a language of molecules, shared and understood through the fungal network. In this way, the forest becomes aware of itself not as a collection of individuals, but as a unified system, responsive and alive. Some trees become hubs of this underground network, massive, old trees with deep roots and wide crowns. Scientists call them mother trees. They sit at the center of these webs, connected to hundreds of younger trees around them. Through the fungal threads, they share sugars, hormones, and even memory. When a seedling sprouts in the shade, too small to gather enough sunlight, it is often these mother trees that send help directing extra carbon through the network to nourish the young shoot. These old giants don't just compete for space, they nurture, protect, and remember. The fungal partners themselves are not passive conduits, they shape the flow of information. Some species form tight-knit relationships with particular trees, while others link multiple species together, bridging different parts of the forest. The fungi regulate the traffic, deciding which connections to strengthen, which to let fade. Their decisions are invisible to us, but not random. They seem to favor balance, diversity, resilience. When a tree dies, its remaining sugars are not wasted. They are rerouted through the web, absorbed by others. In this way, even death feeds the system. Nothing is lost. Everything is shared. The entire forest floor becomes a kind of neural net, echoing the structure of a brain, but made of wood and thread and soil. It processes information over time, shaping how the ecosystem responds to change. This communication is slow by human standards. Messages can take hours or days to travel, but it is persistent, layered, and wise. Forests remember droughts, recover from wounds, adapt to their surroundings through a conversation that is ongoing, though we cannot hear it. Walk through a forest after rain, and the earth feels soft beneath your feet. That dampness carries life. The fungal threads absorb water and help hold it in place, passing moisture between roots. In dry seasons, this sharing can mean the difference between survival and death. Trees in these networks don't just fend for themselves. They support one another, balancing growth with generosity, strength with sensitivity. The more connected a tree is, the longer it tends to live. And yet, this delicate web is easily damaged. When soil is compacted or stripped bare, when the forest is cut down and fragmented, the fungal highways break apart. Trees left standing after a clear cut lose their partners. Their communication ceases. Their health declines. Like neurons severed from the brain, they are alive, but alone. Restoration takes time. Fungi are patient architects, but they need stability, quiet, and the unbroken threads of time to rebuild. Scientists are still learning how far this network extends. In some forests, it may stretch across entire hillsides, even valleys, each connection invisible to the eye, but critical to the forest's survival. The fungi do not speak, but they listen. They transmit the needs and responses of trees across time and space, and trees, in turn, have learned to trust the signals, to shape their lives around this silent web. There is no central control, no single voice, just countless whispers, layered and interwoven, carrying the memory of water, of fire, of kin and season and change. This is not a myth or metaphor. It is measurable, it is real, and it means that the forest is not simply a backdrop to life. It is life in conversation with itself, root to root, thread to thread, not a collection of trees, but a community, a body, a mind. And the fungi, ancient and tireless, are its quiet messengers, keeping the system alive with every breath of soil. In the stillness of the forest, messages drift silently through the air. We often think of trees as mute and motionless, rooted in place with no means to speak. But the canopy is alive with invisible language, a vaporous code carried on the breeze. These are not words, not in the way we understand them, but chemical whispers, pulses of light, and subtle changes in shade. What you see when you look at a forest is only the outer layer. Beneath the green, the trees are talking. When a tree is attacked by insects, disease, or grazing animals, it doesn't suffer quietly. It releases a burst of volatile compounds, chemicals that rise like invisible smoke, drifting through the leaves and into the air. These molecules don't linger. They move with purpose, reaching the surrounding trees, carried on the wind. And when neighboring trees detect the signal, they respond. Some begin producing bitter tannins or toughening their leaves. Others flood their tissues with enzymes to make themselves less palatable. It's as if one tree says, "I'm under attack," and the others reply, "We hear you. We're preparing." These airborne warnings are not random. Different threats trigger different signals. A chewing insect prompts a different chemical than a fungus or drought. The forest doesn't scream. It breathes information. Every scent, though too faint for human noses, is part of a shifting conversation. Who is hungry? Who is wounded? What danger rides the wind? Some trees go further. When they detect an invader, they not only defend themselves, but call for help. They summon predators. A willow under attack might emit a compound that attracts parasitic wasps, tiny hunters that lay their eggs inside the insects feeding on its leaves. The wasps arrive quickly, drawn by a scent that is both a warning and an invitation. The tree cannot move, but it can call allies. It can shape the battlefield. This kind of chemical signaling isn't limited to trees of the same species. Sometimes, plants of entirely different kinds will pick up the messages and respond in kind. A beech may hear a whisper from a neighboring birch. A maple may eavesdrop on a pine. It is a kind of ecological empathy, one tree's pain prompting another's defenses. These exchanges are not loud. They are quiet, frequent, and ongoing. A low hum of awareness shared through scent. But air is not the only medium for communication. Light, too, becomes a message. At the top of the forest, where sunlight hits the canopy in shifting sheets, trees track the angle and intensity of each beam. Leaves are not passive solar panels. They move, stretch, tilt, and contract in response to light. And when light changes when something blocks it, or reflects it differently, trees notice. Some plants can detect the specific wavelengths of light bouncing off neighboring leaves. They read the reflections to sense crowding, predicting how close another plant is growing. If competition is near, they may adjust their own shape, growing taller or broader to capture more sun. Others may pull back, conserving energy, avoiding the fight altogether. In this way, light becomes a signal of presence, proximity, and strategy. Shade is not just darkness, it is information. The color and softness of light tells a tree what season it is, how high the sun is, and what time of day. Morning light has a different hue than evening. A passing cloud changes the rhythm. Trees respond with shifts in photosynthesis, opening or closing pores, moving water and sugars through their bodies. They are reading the sky constantly, listening not with ears but with chlorophyll. Even damage to a single leaf can ripple outward. When one part of a plant is wounded, chemical messengers travel not just through the air, but within. The leaf, carried by fluid pressure or electrical charge. In moments, the whole tree knows. It may adjust its metabolism, reduce growth, or shift resources to safer branches. And as this internal signal is released, part of it may rise into the air, joining the forest's larger stream of invisible communication. Researchers have found that some plants under attack will begin emitting compounds even before the attacker arrives. If they've learned the signs, a particular smell or temperature, a sound of chewing, they can preempt the event, responding not just to what has happened, but to what's about to. Memory, anticipation, and response all exist in the quiet drift of molecules. The shimmer of the forest is not just beauty, it is code. Light dancing on leaves is a kind of broadcast. Shifts in color or pattern may indicate stress, infection, or age. Insects tuned to ultraviolet can detect these changes, guiding them to healthy leaves or warning them away. Trees, too, may pick up these differences, adjusting their behavior in turn. Vision, even without eyes. It's easy to forget that we are only seeing a fraction of the forest's dialogue. The language of plants is slow, dense, and complex. It travels not in seconds, but over minutes, hours, sometimes days. But once it begins, it persists, spreading through air and light like a whisper across generations. In some experiments, scientists placed a plant in one chamber and allowed it to be attacked by insects. In a neighboring chamber, sealed from physical contact but connected by airflow, a second plant began activating its defenses within hours. No roots touched, no leaves brushed, just molecules drifting invisibly, alerting one life form to the struggle of another. In this way, a forest becomes more than a group of trees. It becomes a sensory network, not digital, not electronic, but biological, breathing, and alive. Each tree is both sender and receiver, each leaf both an ear and a voice. Together, they form a kind of chorus, not of sound, but of scent and shimmer, unfolding in slow harmonies beneath the sky. And somewhere in that quiet, as the branches sway and the leaves catch the light, something ancient is being remembered, that life is not solitary, that even the stillest beings are listening. Deep beneath the forest floor, where roots weave like veins through the soil, trees are carrying on conversations in a language older than words. This language doesn't rely on scent or sound. It flows through cells as tiny flickers of voltage, pulses of energy traveling slowly but deliberately through the underground limbs of trees, while the world above moves in rustling leaves and drifting light. Down below, the roots speak with electricity. Each root tip is more than just a seeker of water or anchor for stability. It is alive with receptors, membranes, and sensing structures that respond to the environment. At their core, roots are sensory organs, constantly sampling the soil around them, absorbing minerals, tasting the acidity, and listening for signals. When a root encounters something new, a stone, a sudden drought, a trace of an invader, it sends an alert, not with chemicals alone, but through electrical impulses, shifts in ion concentrations that ripple outward like gentle currents through the root system. These signals begin at the cellular level, where tiny differences in charge build across membranes. When a stimulus is strong enough, the cell responds by opening gateways, microscopic channels that allow ions like calcium or potassium to flood in or out. This changes the electrical state of the cell, and that change moves, passing from one cell to the next, traveling through the plant like a message in Morse code. In trees, these impulses move slowly compared to our nerves, sometimes only a few millimeters per second. But speed isn't the point. It's the continuity, the transmission, the fact that something is felt and responded to across great lengths of wood and root and time. When a tree is wounded by a chewing insect, a fungal breach, or sudden damage, it doesn't just release chemical distress signals. It also transmits an electrical spike through its tissues. This spike can trigger defense responses, like the production of tannins or the closing of pores, even in parts of the tree that haven't yet been touched. In essence, the tree warns itself. It reaches forward into time, preparing for what may come. But more than that, it may also be warning others. Through shared root zones, where trees physically connect below ground or via fungal networks, these voltage changes can spread to neighboring trees. Subtle, localized shifts in electrical potential ripple through the dark, alerting others nearby that something has changed. A threat has emerged. A neighbor is hurt. The forest reacts not all at once, but as a series of awakenings, a cascade of quiet, readiness. These pulses are not random jolts. They follow patterns. Just as the human brain uses electrical rhythms to encode thoughts and feelings, trees may use voltage waves to encode stress, injury, light levels, or hydration. Some researchers believe these signals act like a code, a biological language written in spikes and slopes, transmitted slowly through roots and shoots. Trees do not speak, but they broadcast, and the signals, once sent, are remembered. In some experiments, when plants were exposed to sudden cold or touch, they generated measurable electrical changes that echoed through their roots. These weren't chaotic bursts, but organized waves, flowing out from the point of contact. In others, the removal of a leaf triggered changes far below in the root system, as if the entire organism was recalibrating. Each change in voltage was a kind of acknowledgement. Something happened. Take note. The root tips, in particular, behave almost like primitive brains. They are the first to detect stimuli in the soil, and their responses shape how the rest of the plant behaves. Some scientists have even speculated that root tips communicate with each other, not only through hormones and chemical gradients, but through synchronized voltage patterns. These patterns shift when two roots from different plants approach one another. They may pause, turn or slow, as if assessing what lies ahead. Is this a friend, a sibling, a stranger? Trees appear to recognize one another long before their branches ever meet. Electrical signaling may also help coordinate growth. Roots don't grow blindly, they navigate with intention, curling toward moisture, avoiding competition, sometimes growing faster or slower in response to stimuli. The signals that guide this movement are more than chemical. They are electrical dialogues between cells, responding to shifts in gravity, light, nutrients, and even the presence of other roots. It's not just that the roots know where to grow, it's that they decide where to grow, together. In dense forests, where roots tangle like threads in a loom, the exchange of signals becomes even more complex. One tree's signal may affect not just its own structure, but that of the trees nearby. If one tree becomes stressed, others may reduce their water uptake in sympathy, preserving shared resources. If one root zone detects metal toxicity or an approaching pest, others may alter their growth, avoiding danger. This is not empathy in the human sense, but a kind of distributed awareness, a decentralized intelligence flowing through the forest floor. And just like in neural systems, memory plays a role. Some plants show what researchers call electrical memory, the ability to respond more strongly to a repeated stimulus than they did the first time. Over time, these bioelectrical patterns shape how a plant behaves, how it adapts, and how it survives. This memory doesn't sit in a brain or a single cell. It is spread throughout the living system, held in the voltage of membranes, in the ion gradients between root cells. It is a living map of experience. To walk in a forest is to tread above a web of voltage and thought. Every step above a root system may be stirring. Faint responses, pressure detected, light altered, space registered. Beneath the soil, the roots shift, sense, and adjust, slow and steady and enduring. The language is not one we were built to hear, but it is there. And while we once imagined trees as still and unaware, we now know better. Their awareness is not immediate. It is not loud, but it is deep, rooted, electrical. A quiet current moving through the body of the forest, lighting its underground network one pulse at a time. In the dim light beneath the forest canopy, the story of connection is being told by the most unlikely narrators. They are not tall or green or crowned in leaves. They have no trunks, no flowers, no faces to turn toward the sun. They are the fungi, ancient, quiet, and almost invisible. Yet they are the ones who keep the forest alive. For every tree standing in the light, there is a partner below, hidden in the soil, reaching out in gossamer threads, so fine they pass through grains of dirt, like light through fog. These threads, called hyphae, extend from the fungi into the roots of trees and beyond, forming partnerships so intricate that neither organism could survive alone. This relationship, known as mycorrhiza, is one of nature's oldest and most complex alliances. The term itself means fungus root, and that is exactly what it is, a merging of fungal filament and plant root into a single cooperative interface. The fungi receive sugars, carbon-rich energy produced by the tree's photosynthesis high above, and in return, they offer minerals, water, and information gathered from a far wider range than the tree's own roots could reach. The tree, tall and sun-fed, becomes a source of nourishment for fungi, while the fungi, small and soil-bound, become the forest's postal system, couriers, translators, and distributors all at once. But the role of these fungi goes far beyond mere nutrient exchange. They act as intermediaries, ferrying messages between trees, even between different species. A spruce may signal through fungal threads to a birch. An alder may receive carbon from a pine. The boundaries we imagine between individual trees begin to dissolve when seen through the lens of the mycorrhizal network. In this hidden system, competition softens into cooperation, and solitary life becomes community. The threads of mycorrhizal fungi are so fine that a single cubic inch of forest soil can contain several miles of them. They reach out in every direction, probing, connecting, latching onto root tips like delicate circuits snapping into place. When two trees are connected through the same fungal network, the fungi can act as brokers, negotiating the flow of nutrients based on need. A tree in deep shade may receive extra sugars from one bathed in sunlight. A sapling growing under the wing of an old mother tree may be fed before it can fend for itself. The fungi seem to know where to direct their efforts, regulating the traffic of resources with subtle precision. They also help maintain the balance of power. Trees that hoard too much or give too little may be isolated or bypassed. Those that contribute are favored, supported, connected more deeply into the web. It's a kind of organic economy, not driven by greed or control, but by stability. The fungi benefit most when the forest thrives. Their goal is not to elevate one species or another, but to maintain equilibrium, to keep the system alive. Different fungi perform different roles. Some specialize in certain tree species, forming tight, exclusive bonds. Others are generalists, bridging gaps between trees that might otherwise remain strangers. In old-growth forests, a single fungal individual, technically called a mycelium, can span dozens of acres, connecting thousands of trees in a continuous network. These massive organisms live for centuries, perhaps millennia, quietly threading life through the soil. They have no eyes, but they sense. They have no voice, but they carry messages. When a tree is injured or dying, the fungi redirect its stored nutrients to healthier neighbors. In this way, the death of one becomes the resilience of others. Nothing is wasted. Everything is transformed. Even fallen logs, decaying quietly on the forest floor, are still part of the cycle. Fungi break down their tissues, releasing elements back into the soil, feeding not only roots, but future generations. They are nature's recyclers and record keepers, turning decay into rebirth. And then there are the warnings. When a tree comes under attack by pests, pathogens, drought, the fungi help relay the chemical signals to others. These alerts move through the network, carried by the fungal filaments, like wires, transmitting an electric charge. Trees receiving the signal may ramp up their defenses, alter their growth, or send support in return. The fungi do not interpret these messages as we would, but they pass them on without bias, without delay. They are the forest's nervous system, reactive and responsive. This symbiosis is not a quiet footnote in the story of life. It is foundational. Without it, forests as we know them would collapse. Most tree species cannot thrive, or even survive, without their fungal partners. Seeds planted in sterile soil may sprout, but they grow slowly, weakly, if at all. Introduce the right fungi, and they flourish. The connection is that vital, not just a bonus, but a necessity. Even more astonishing, recent studies suggest that trees raised with access to a mycorrhizal network exhibit different behaviors. They are more resilient to stress, more generous with their neighbors, more responsive to their environment. The fungi don't just carry messages, they shape behavior. In a sense, they are part of the tree's decision-making system, part of how it learns and adapts. And in shaping trees, they shape forests. And in shaping forests, they shape the world. It's easy to overlook them. A mushroom poking through the moss is just the tip, the fruiting body of something unimaginably vast and ancient that lies hidden below. Most of a fungus lives out of sight, forming an underground tapestry so dense and interlaced that it becomes hard to say where one organism ends and another begins. The boundaries blur. Identity becomes shared. Life becomes networked. So the next time you stand among trees, remember that you are surrounded not just by trunks and leaves, but by threads of connection, countless, whispering lines of communication and care. spun by organisms too small to see but too important to ignore. They are the middlemen of the forest, the keepers of the quiet pact between earth and light, and without them, nothing would grow. In every old forest, if you look closely enough, you'll find giants standing among the many. Their trunks are thicker, their crowns wider, their roots deeper. They do not rise above their neighbors by accident. These are the trees that have survived countless storms, watched centuries drift by in wind and rain, and held the shape of the forest in their memory. These are the mother trees, ancient elders that do more than grow. They care. The idea that a tree could act as a parent might seem strange at first. We're used to thinking of plants as solitary, passive, but mother trees break that illusion. Deep in their roots and vast in their branches, they carry the wisdom of survival, and they do not hoard it. Their roots stretch far, braided with fungal networks that connect them to hundreds, sometimes thousands, of other trees, young, old, related, and unrelated. But to their kin, they give more. Through the mycorrhizal threads, mother trees send carbon to their offspring, sugars built from sunlight, drawn down through leaves and funneled through roots into the dark. These aren't random donations. Seedlings growing in the shadow of a mother tree, especially those born from her own seeds, receive more nourishment than strangers do. The mother tree knows her kin. Somehow, without eyes or a brain, she distinguishes them from the rest, and she feeds them. This gift of carbon is more than a kindness. It's survival. In dense forests, light is scarce on the forest floor. A young tree, barely a twig, might spend years in darkness, unable to make enough food for itself. Alone, it would wither, but with help from its mother, it stays alive. The elder holds it through the hard years, giving it time to grow, to reach the light in its own season. It is a slow rescue, one measured in decades, but sugars are not the only gifts passed down. Mother trees also send chemical signals, messages that prime their seedlings for danger. If the mother tree has endured drought, disease, or infestation, she can pass on a kind of biochemical memory. Her seedlings respond not just to what they face, but to what she faced. They build stronger defenses, more resilient tissues, because she has told them to. In this way, mother trees shape the next generation not just with food, but with foresight. Their influence spreads outward through the forest like ripples in a pond. Trees connected to a mother through the underground network grow faster, live longer, and resist stress more effectively than those that are not. They are tethered not just to a source of sustenance, but to a center of information. The mother tree becomes an anchor in the forest's social web, a stabilizer, a relay, a guardian of the young. Sometimes, when a mother tree begins to die, she sends a final surge of carbon through her roots, directing it to her offspring. It is a last breath of generosity, a quiet bequest. Even in death, she does not retreat into silence. Her nutrients flow into the next generation. Her body may fall, but her influence remains. In the soil, in the roots, in the memory of the forest itself. Mother trees are not rare, but they are vulnerable. Logging often targets the largest and oldest individuals, the trees that stand tallest, whose trunks offer the most timber. But in removing them, we do more than take wood. We sever the social fabric of the forest. The loss echoes through the network, cutting off the flow of carbon, severing communication, leaving orphaned saplings behind with no support. It's not just the tree that falls, it's the architecture of care. And these elders do more than nurture. They regulate. They space their offspring deliberately, ensuring that young trees do not grow too close together and compete. Through the underground network, they send signals that inhibit the germination of too many nearby seeds. This is not selfishness. It is stewardship. By thinning their own progeny, they ensure that the few who remain have a chance to thrive. In a world of limited light and resources, not every seed can become a tree. The mother decides which will rise. Their role is more than biological. It is ecological. These trees hold soil in place with roots that have weathered centuries. Their fallen leaves create habitats. Their hollow trunks shelter owls and insects. Their branches filter rain and light in ways that shape entire ecosystems. They are not merely parts of the forest. They are its pillars. Their presence shapes not only what grows, but how it grows and in what rhythm. And perhaps, most surprisingly, their actions are not confined to their own species. In some forests, mother trees have been found nurturing saplings of different kinds, helping birches, firs, or pines survive when their own kin are scarce. The care they offer is guided by connection, not only by blood. When the network senses imbalance, the mother tree responds, redistributing nutrients where they're needed most. It is a lesson in quiet equity, in response without hierarchy. It's easy to forget, when walking through a forest, that these silent giants are doing more than standing still. Beneath their bark, in the quiet dark of the soil, they are speaking, sending pulses of sugar and chemistry through long, filamentous wires, feeding, teaching, remembering, and watching. A mother tree may live for hundreds of years, weathering fires, floods, droughts, and storms, and in every ring of her wood is a story of hardship, of abundance, of survival. But her true legacy isn't just in her size or her age. It's in the forest that rises around her taller, stronger, more resilient because she was there, because she gave. And when she falls, it is not the end of her story. Her roots remain in the earth, her nutrients seep into the soil, and the memory of her care lingers in the seedlings she once cradled beneath her shade. The forest remembers, and it grows on. In the still air of the savanna or the shaded hush of a temperate forest, danger does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly on the breath of a giraffe reaching for leaves, or in the bite of a caterpillar chewing through soft green tissue. To us, it may seem like nothing, a moment of nature simply unfolding, but to the tree being eaten, this is an alarm, and in that moment it begins to speak. When an acacia tree in the African plains senses it is under attack, it doesn't rely on strength alone. Instead, it changes the chemistry of its leaves, flooding them with bitter compounds that make them unpalatable. The taste sharpens, the texture toughens, and the message to the herbivore is clear: move along. But the acacia doesn't just defend itself, it warns others. It releases ethylene gas into the air, a volatile chemical that drifts on the wind. Other acacias nearby detect this scent, and within minutes, they too begin, increasing their leaf tannins. By the time the giraffe has wandered to the next tree, it finds the flavor changed, the food less welcoming. This is not coincidence. It is communication fast, chemical, and decisive. A defense shared. The same is true in temperate forests. When a willow is damaged by insects, it emits a cloud of methyl jasmonate, a compound that floats into the surrounding air. Nearby willows sense this and preemptively activate their own defense genes. They don't wait to be bitten. They start producing defensive proteins and bitter compounds, armoring themselves before the threat arrives. It's a system built not for isolation, but for community survival. One tree's distress becomes another's readiness. These airborne messages are subtle, invisible to the eye, and too faint for the human nose. But among plants, they are loud. And what's remarkable is that different threats produce different chemicals. A willow attacked by caterpillars will send one type of warning. A different signal is triggered by bacterial infection. The forest distinguishes between types of danger and responds with tailored defenses. The language of plants is chemical, yes, but it is not simple. Some trees even call in reinforcements. Corn seedlings under attack by herbivores release specific scents that attract parasitic wasps, natural enemies of the pests. The wasps arrive not because they sympathize, but because they recognize opportunity to a place to lay eggs inside the very creatures that are doing the damage. The plant becomes a signal flare, summoning allies it cannot see but somehow understands will come. In this way, defense is outsourced, delegated to the right hands or wings. In mixed forests, these chemical signals don't always stay within a single species. A maple tree may alert a birch. A poplar may prime a pine. The network of warning is wide, and the responses ripple outward like waves in still water. It suggests a level of interspecies, cooperation not built on emotion or loyalty, but on mutual benefit. The stronger the forest, the better each tree's chance of survival. Alarm becomes resilience, and the trees do not act blindly. They assess, they prioritize. A tree may respond more strongly to a warning if the threat is near, or if the wind carries the chemical message with certain strength and direction. It's not just hearing, but interpreting, a measured calculation of risk. Even young saplings, not yet tall enough to see the sun, will respond if they are connected through shared air or roots. Defense, in the plant world, is not reserved for the mature. It is taught from the ground up. These warning systems don't just defend against animals or insects. They also prepare for heat, drought, and disease. A stressed tree may release signals that cause others to conserve water, slow growth, or tighten their pores. It is an act of collective adaptation, not panic, but preparation. And unlike the panicked shouts of fleeing animals, these plant messages move slowly, thoughtfully. They persist in the air long enough to be understood, even hours later. A message left hanging, waiting to be read. It's easy to think of trees as passive, as background to the livelier world of animals, but beneath their stillness is a kind of quiet vigilance. They are not waiting to die. They are listening, analyzing, responding, and reaching out to others when the world shifts. The wind is not just wind, it is a carrier of stories. The rustle of leaves is not just a song, it is a language, encoded in molecules and scent, telling of danger, pain, and survival. In every forest, in every grove, the trees are talking, not with voices, but with chemistry, not with urgency, but with intention. They do not run, but they do resist, and they do it together. The forest is filled with language, though none of it is spoken aloud. Its sentences drift through the air, dissolve into the wind, or seep quietly through the soil. Trees do not need voices to communicate. They speak in chemistry, in invisible clouds and bitter flavors, in compounds crafted not for show but for meaning. Among the most eloquent of these are terpenes, tannins, and phenols, molecules not only of defense and survival, but of dialogue. They are the syllables of a living vocabulary, shared by trees, plants, insects, and even fungi, spoken through breath and bark and leaf. Terpenes are among the most widespread of these forest messengers. They're the sharp scent of pine resin, the sweetness of citrus, the herbal edge in a eucalyptus grove. To human senses, they are pleasant, familiar, often calming. But to the tree, a terpene is more than a scent. It is an announcement, a declaration. Some terpenes repel insects. Others warn nearby plants that an injury has occurred, triggering preemptive defenses. When a tree is attacked, it doesn't just suffer in silence. It responds by flooding its leaves with these volatile molecules, sending a chemical flare into the air that tells its neighbors, "I'm under siege, prepare yourself." But these messages are not one note. Different terpenes carry different meanings. Some tell insects to stay away. Others attract predators that feed on those insects. Some signal fungal partners, reminding them that the host tree is still healthy, still sharing sugars. And when conditions change, when light dims, or water becomes scarce, or damage spreads, the recipe shifts. The blend of terpenes alters. The forest rewrites its message. The chemistry of a single tree becomes a complex sentence, parsed and interpreted by everything around it. Tannins, by contrast, are more grounded. Less about movement, more about presence. They are stored in leaves and bark, waiting in silence until needed. When a tree is bitten or bruised, tannins rush to the surface, making the tissue taste bitter, even toxic. They bind to proteins in the saliva of herbivores, making digestion difficult, discouraging further feeding. It's not just a defense, it's a deterrent, a warning wrapped in flavor. And like terpenes, tannins vary in type and concentration. A tree might deploy more tannins in spring, when its leaves are tender and vulnerable. Or it might shift its tannin profile, depending on the type of herbivore it encounters, tailoring its response to match the threat. But tannins do more than push things away. They also affect the soil beneath the tree. As fallen leaves decay, tannins seep into the ground, shaping which microbes thrive and which do not. They can slow decomposition, regulate the availability of nutrients, and subtly influence the balance of species nearby. In this way, a tree's taste becomes part of its territorial expression, shaping the ecosystem from the roots up. Then there are the phenols, a diverse family of molecules with roles that stretch from defense to attraction. Some phenols are antioxidants, protecting plant tissues from UV, radiation, or oxidative stress. Others are used in signaling, emitted into the air, or leaked through roots to communicate with neighbors. One tree might release phenolic compounds into the soil to discourage the growth of competitors. Another might increase its internal phenol levels to strengthen cell walls during drought or disease. Like a shifting dialect, the message depends on context. Together, terpenes, tannins, and phenols create a multi-layered chemical language. They blend, overlap, and evolve. A single tree may use all three simultaneously, crafting a message that says, "I am hurt, stay away. But if you are a helper, come close." This complexity allows trees to fine-tune their interactions, to adjust their chemical posture depending on who is listening, be it another tree, an insect, a fungus, or a microbe. In this world, communication is not about sound. It is about presence, about chemistry, and every molecule carries weight. Some researchers have even likened this system to a kind of forest-wide immune response. Just as our bodies detect pathogens and respond with targeted molecules, trees sense injury or infection and react with a tailored chemical response. But in forests, this reaction doesn't stop at the individual. It spreads. Trees primed by chemical cues from their neighbors can respond more quickly to the same threat when it reaches them. It's a form of learned awareness, a memory passed not through genes but through scent. The forest remembers what has harmed it. Even more astonishing is the specificity. A tree doesn't just release a flood of chemicals every time it's touched. It distinguishes between a grazing deer, a burrowing beetle, or a fungal infection. It tailors its molecular vocabulary, releasing different blends depending on the identity and severity of the threat. And those blends, in turn, are read differently by different organisms. What repels one species might attract another. What warns a neighbor might entice an ally. And all of this happens in silence. We walk through forests, sensing only fragments of this language, a hint of pine, the sharpness of crushed leaves, the earthy sweetness after rain. To us, it's ambiance. But to the trees, it's conversation. They are constantly composing and recomposing, shifting their chemistry in response to the world around them, editing the air and the soil with every breath, every bite, every beam of sun. The forest is not quiet, it is fluent, and it does not speak to be heard. It speaks to be understood, by roots and wings and mouths, by the rain that falls and the fungi that listen. And though we have only begun to decipher its words, we now know this much. Trees are not mute. They are articulate. Their chemistry is a code, and the forest, when we learn to read it, is a page written in scent and taste and time. In the hush beneath the canopy, where filtered light drips like honey through the leaves and the ground stays cool and damp, trees grow close to one another, their roots woven into the soil like fingers tangled in sleep. To the casual observer, a forest may seem a mass of indistinguishable trunks and branches, each tree a copy of the next. But beneath the bark, something far more intricate unfolds. These trees, rooted and silent, are not blind to one another. They can tell who is kin and who is not. Roots, reaching unseen beneath the forest floor, do not grope blindly through the dark. They are sensory organs, rich in receptors and alive with activity. When a tree's roots brush against another's, it can detect more than just pressure or texture. It can sense genetic familiarity, a chemical resonance that signals whether the tree it touches is family. This recognition is not metaphor. It is measurable. Trees of the same species, even more so those of the same parent, respond differently to one another than to strangers. And the difference is in how they share. In experiments with species like beech, pine, and Douglas fir, scientists have discovered that trees consistently offer more resources to their relatives. When two seedlings of the same mother are planted near one another, their roots avoid growing aggressively into each other's space. They limit their expansion, choosing not to compete. Instead of taking, they begin to give, exchanging nutrients through shared fungal networks, transferring carbon, nitrogen, and water in amounts that favor their kin. The flow is not equal. It is generous. But when those same trees encounter strangers, the behavior shifts. Their roots grow more densely, overlapping, even attempting to overtake the intruder. The trees invest more in themselves, withholding the kinds of gifts they freely give to family. The chemistry of competition replaces the chemistry of care. This doesn't mean hostility, only that the forest recognizes the boundaries of relationship. The trees know which neighbors are part of them and which are not. This behavior, subtle and slow, mirrors empathy in its simplest form, the willingness to sacrifice for those with whom we share something deep and unseen. Trees that recognize family make decisions that affect not just their own survival, but the survival of their lineage. They adjust their growth, their resource sharing, even their defense mechanisms. A mother tree will direct more of her carbon to her own seedlings than to unrelated saplings nearby. If resources are scarce, the strangers may go without. Yet this selective generosity is not cruel. It is ecological strategy shaped by millions of years. In nurturing kin, a tree increases the odds that its genetic legacy will persist. But in many forests, this favoritism doesn't harden into isolation. It coexists with broader networks of cooperation. A mother fir may give the most to her children, but she may still lend nutrients to a neighboring birch in need. The lines of care ripple outward, stronger at the center, but never ending there. And the ability to recognize family extends beyond trees. Even among herbaceous plants, such as sea rocket and goldenrod, kin recognition has been observed. In shared soil, relatives grow in patterns that reduce competition, allocating roots in ways that maximize group success. Strangers, by contrast, trigger defensive growth. Thicker stems, deeper roots, faster resource consumption. The plants are not reacting to touch alone. They are sensing genetic similarity. Somehow, without eyes or ears, they know who belongs. The mechanisms behind this recognition are still being unraveled, but scientists suspect that roots release signature cocktails of chemicals into the soil, exudates that act like identification tags. These exudates are complex mixtures of sugars, amino acids, phenolics, and secondary metabolites. They shape the microbial community around the root zone, influence fungal partnerships, and are read by nearby roots like invisible ink. When a familiar signal is detected, the response is altered. The plant does not react with wariness, but with trust. Even more remarkable is that this form of recognition may shape the entire structure of a forest. Families of trees grow in clusters, their roots knit together, not just by accident, but by design. Their growth is coordinated, their health is intertwined. Saplings raised near kin show more stable growth, better resistance to stress, and higher survival rates. The forest, in this way, becomes a kind of extended organism, not singular, but familial, made strong by countless small decisions of care and cooperation. This form of empathy is not emotional in the way we experience it, but it is real. It is embodied in behavior, in the giving or withholding of life. And it suggests something quiet but profound, that even without minds, the living world is capable of preference, of recognition, of connection that transcends the self. The roots beneath our feet are not passive, they are attentive, discerning. They know when they are home. In the tangled underworld of soil and silence, trees make choices. They recognize their kin and offer them more. They sense strangers and behave accordingly. Their lives are not only about growing tall or drinking in light. They are also about remembering, sensing, and responding to the presence of others. And though they move slowly, though their choices unfold over years rather than moments, they are choices all the same, subtle, generous, alive. Long before trees towered into the sky, before forests even had names, the land was mostly bare, rocks and shallow pools, lichen clinging to stone, no roots yet tangled in the dirt, no canopies filtering sunlight into shadow. Life, in its early ambition, was still learning how to stretch beyond the oceans. But beneath the surface of that ancient world, something was already at work, something silent, filamentous, and endlessly patient. Fungi, not plants, not animals, something older, something stranger. These fungal beings were the first architects of land life. For hundreds of millions of years, they existed in quiet partnership with microbes, weaving through the soil before it even had the richness we now call soil. They fed on minerals, broke down stone into dust, and waited. When the first green algae began pushing ashore, hesitant and soft, it was fungi that welcomed them, not with arms, but with hyphae threads so thin they could slip between the cells of another organism without breaking it. These threads offered a deal: shelter in the roots, sugar in return, a trade between kingdoms, and the earth said, yes. This partnership birthed the earliest land plants, not mighty trees, but small, mossy forms, tiny green pioneers clinging to the edges of rivers and swamps. Alone, they could barely survive the desiccating winds, the hunger of a barren landscape. But with fungi wrapping around their roots, forming dense sheaths or slipping inside their cells, they gained access to something new, nutrients locked in the stone, phosphorus, nitrogen, the building blocks of growth. The fungi, in return, drank the sugars the plants crafted from sunlight. It was not a one-sided transaction. It was mutual evolution, one shaping the other across eons. The name for this ancient relationship is Mycorrhiza, from the Greek for fungus and root. But that term doesn't capture the scope of the alliance. This was not merely a convenience. It was a blueprint. Mycorrhizal fungi made it possible for plants to colonize the land. They expanded the effective reach of roots by hundreds of times, forming networks that could scavenge minerals far beyond what a plant could find on its own. These networks were vast, branching into every direction, linking one plant to another. The earth beneath became a living map. Over time, as plants grew more complex, so did their fungal partners. Some fungi remained outside plant cells, coating the roots in protective webs. Others penetrated the root cells themselves, forming elegant, tree-like structures called arbuscules, a fitting name for fungi that would one day support real forests. These structures allowed for precise exchange, one cell delivering phosphorus, another receiving carbon, a delicate handshake, molecule by molecule, repeated millions of times a second. By the time the first trees emerged, the fungal networks were already ancient. They had been shaping the land for over 400 million years, long before any bird sang in a branch or mammal stirred in the shade. and the trees, in turn, adapted to their fungal companions. Some developed intricate root systems with specialized zones for symbiosis. Others altered their chemical signals to attract certain fungal species. Entire forests bloomed not just because of rain or sun, but because of the minds in the soil. And mind may not be too strong a word. Though fungi have no brains, their networks behave with uncanny intelligence. They detect signals, reroute flows, prioritize certain connections. If one part of a fungal network is damaged, the rest can adjust, bypass, recover. Nutrients are shuttled not randomly, but purposefully favoring young seedlings, stressed individuals, or trees that offer better sugars in return. The mycelium remembers, it calculates, it optimizes. Some scientists compare large fungal networks to neural systems, not because they think fungi are conscious in a human sense, but because the similarities are striking. Vast webs of filaments, responsive to stimuli, capable of transmitting information. A forest laced with mycorrhiza is a place where decisions are being made slowly, invisibly, but with consequence. When one tree is sick, the fungal network may divert resources to help. When another is thriving, it may become a hub, supplying others through its roots. The network learns the forest's needs and responds, and this intelligence is not limited to one species. Fungi form bridges between plants that would otherwise never speak. In mixed forests, they connect oaks to maples, birches to firs, even grasses and shrubs join in. The result is a superorganism, an ecological internet with fungi as routers and translators. Without them, each plant would be an island. With them, the forest becomes a chorus. We are only beginning to understand how deep this connection goes. In boreal forests, in tropical jungles, in the tiny root hairs of your backyard tree, the same ancient patterns repeat. Mycorrhizal fungi continue to weave the underground web, enabling plants to thrive in places they never could alone. They regulate water uptake. They help resist disease. They modulate the bacterial communities around the root zone. They even play a role in carbon storage, trapping atmospheric carbon in stable soil structures. What began as a simple exchange has become a planetary system, and yet they remain mostly hidden. When we walk through a forest, we tread over miles of fungal thread, thin as silk, strong as steel, humming with activity. They are beneath every footstep, shaping the rhythm of life above. Most will never be seen. They do not demand recognition. They simply continue growing, connecting, remembering. Fungi made the world green. They turned rock into refuge, algae into forests, solitude into community. And still, beneath every tree, they whisper the same promise they made hundreds of millions of years ago. If you feed me light, I will give you life. A tree does not hurry. Its gestures unfold in the language of patience, in movements measured not in seconds or minutes, but in seasons, in years, in centuries. To truly hear what a tree is saying, one must slow down, slower than thought, slower than breath, until time itself begins to stretch and settle. In this quiet rhythm, trees speak, not in bursts or exclamations, but in pulses, in slow exchanges carried by light, by air, by the steady rise and fall of sap. When one tree sends out a chemical signal, the message does not race like a scream. It drifts. The molecules rise through the air or seep into the ground, and hours may pass before a nearby tree detects them. A shift in leaf chemistry might take a full day. The release of a warning scent could peak only after the sun has gone down. The response from a neighbor might not begin until morning. These are not delays. They are the tempo of a life that is never in a rush. Electrical impulses, when they move through roots or stems, travel at a crawl, perhaps a centimeter every few seconds. Compared to the human nervous system, where signals flash from brain to fingertip in an instant, a tree's inner current is like a river of thought moving beneath ice. But that slowness is not a flaw. It is a feature of endurance. Trees are not built for quick exits or fast decisions. They are designed for stability, for long-term balance, for communication that unfolds not in urgency, but in persistence. Even the shape of a tree is a kind of sentence written slowly into space. Each branch extends, each ring in the trunk thickens, marking a record of light, drought, storm, or plenty. The tree tells its own story, not just to the world around it, but to its future self. A scar in the bark is not forgotten. It is carried forward, wrapped in new layers of growth, but never erased. The shape of a tree is its history written in wood, and that history is not only personal. Trees that grow near each other, sharing the same soil and seasons, often reflect each other's struggles. Their rings align in drought years, widen together in times of abundance. Scientists can trace the shared pulse of an entire forest through the synchronized beats of growth recorded in trunks spaced miles apart. It's a form of harmony without sound, shaped by weather and water, and perhaps even by the slow transfer of resources through root and fungus. A network built not only from matter, but from rhythm. Mother trees, the elders of the forest, do not just feed the young in times of need. They hold memories. Through their vast root systems and mycorrhizal ties, they share information about past pests, past fires, past famines. This knowledge is not stored in books or brains, but in chemical patterns, in altered soil chemistry, in the behavior of microbial communities shaped by centuries of presence. A seedling growing near such a tree is not only receiving nutrients, it is inheriting a slow education, absorbing lessons passed from generation to generation, not with words, but with the earth itself. Some trees have stood for hundreds, even thousands of years. In that time, entire human civilizations have risen and vanished. Languages have evolved and disappeared, but the tree remains, growing ring by ring, whispering with neighbors it has known for lifetimes. Its conversations are not confined to moments. They are stretched across ages. A tree that leans into the light today is responding to a shift that began years ago. A defensive chemical released now may prepare a neighbor for an attack that comes days later. Everything is spaced out. Everything is deliberate. This long conversation is not confined to the living. Even in death, trees continue to speak. A fallen trunk decays slowly, feeding fungi, insects, and new seedlings. Its nutrients, once hoarded in high leaves, now return to the soil, made available to the community. In some cases, stumps of trees long cut down have been kept alive for decades by their neighbors, nourished through underground connections. These stumps no longer grow, they do not leaf out, but they persist, a kind of silent witness, held in place by the care of others. Even this is part of the dialogue. Time itself becomes a medium of exchange. What humans might consider silence or stasis, trees experience as continuity. Their vocabulary includes delay, dormancy, and slow return. They do not expect immediate replies. They do not interrupt. Instead, they allow time to expand around their intentions. Their responses are not quick, but they are sure, and they are remembered. When we step into a forest, we often imagine it still, frozen in the moment. But that stillness is an illusion of speed. In truth, we are entering an ongoing dialogue, a story already deep in its telling, one that will continue long after we have left. If we could see as trees do, if we could listen on their time scale, we might notice the subtle changes. A leaf yellowing days earlier than usual, a branch angling toward a new gap in the canopy, a faint shift in the taste of rainwater drawn up from roots, messages in motion, too slow for eyes that blink quickly. In this slow communication, there is a kind of wisdom. Trees do not chase novelty. They do not panic. They do not forget. Their language is not shaped by urgency, but by persistence. by the weight of seasons and the pull of deep memory. What they say is shaped by what has come before, and what they prepare for stretches beyond their own lifespans. To understand trees, we must let go of speed. We must allow our senses to extend across days, across years. We must begin to hear in hours what we once thought must be spoken in seconds. Because the forest is talking, always, just more slowly than we're used to. When you walk into a forest, something happens. It's not loud or sudden, not a jolt or a shiver. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Your breath slows, your shoulders ease. The thoughts that chased you through traffic and deadlines begin to fall away, like loose leaves caught in a breeze. And without realizing it, you start to match the rhythm of the place around you, unhurried, watchful, and calm. But this feeling, as gentle as it seems, is not a coincidence. It's not just the quiet or the greenery, it's chemistry. The forest is breathing, and you are breathing with it. Trees, though rooted, are constantly releasing molecules into the air. Invisible clouds drift from their needles, bark, and leaves, not smoke or pollen, but something stranger, more complex. These are volatile organic compounds, and among them is a class of substances known as phytoncides. The word means plant exterminators, but their effects are not always destructive. In fact, they are often the opposite. These compounds serve the trees as shields and signals. They ward off harmful insects, slow the growth of dangerous bacteria, and call to beneficial organisms. But when these same chemicals meet human skin and lungs, they do something more. Inhaling phytoncides has been shown to lower cortisol, the hormone of stress. Heart rate slows, blood pressure stabilizes, the immune system shifts, producing more natural killer cells, the body's frontline defense against infection and disease. It is as if, by stepping into a forest, your body recognizes a language it had forgotten it could understand. And the message is this: you are safe here. This phenomenon has been studied most extensively in Japan, where it is known as Shinrin-yoku forest bathing. Not bathing in water, but in atmosphere. The practice began as a wellness movement in the 1,980 seconds and has since become both tradition and therapy. Forests are chosen carefully for their density, biodiversity, and serenity. People walk slowly beneath canopies of pine or cedar, breathing deeply, allowing the forest to do its quiet work. The benefits linger for days. Some studies show improved mood and immune function lasting more than a week after just a few hours among the trees. But the science only tells part of the story. Phytoncides may be measurable, but the forest's influence is not limited to what can be bottled or named. Trees exhale in compounds, yes, but also in color, in motion, in scent and shadow. The light filtered through leaves is not just beautiful, it's physically different from urban light. It contains less blue and more green, more gentle fluctuation. It nourishes the eyes in ways fluorescent bulbs never can. The patterns of bark, the fractal spread of branches, the layered complexity of undergrowth, all of it speaks to a nervous system evolved in these exact surroundings. We are not just visitors in the forest, we are returning to something ancestral. For most of our history, humans lived in constant relationship with trees for shelter, for food, for fire and direction. We read forests not as decoration, but as maps and medicine. Our senses are still tuned to those frequencies. And so when we enter a wooded glade, the body remembers, the breath deepens, the muscles loosen, the mind stops pacing. Even the smell of a forest is part of this communication. The tang of resin, the sweetness of decaying leaves, the damp mineral scent of soil all carry signals. Some of these are tied to the phytoncides themselves, others to the microbial communities in the ground, or to fungi breaking down old wood. Together, they form a molecular orchestra, that does more than just please the nose. They change the way we feel. A kind of quiet euphoria, free of urgency, begins to rise. This is not imagination. It is chemical literacy. And what's most remarkable is that this effect is not incidental to trees. It's part of their own emotional chemistry. When a tree is injured, it increases its output of volatile compounds, creating a kind of alarm in the air. Nearby trees may respond by thickening their bark, altering their leaf chemistry, or attracting protective insects. The forest becomes a body, aware of its wounds. And when all is calm, the chemistry shifts again back to balance, to a soft exhale of molecules that say, in a language without words, all is well. The forest does not just react, it regulates. It creates an environment that supports its own resilience and, as it happens, ours too. The same compounds that protect trees from rot and predators protect us from stress and disease. The forest doesn't know us, but it holds us anyway, offering something deeper than comfort. It offers coherence, a sense that everything is connected, that the breath of a tree and the breath of a person are part of the same loop. Even in cities, traces of this connection remain. Studies have shown that hospital patients recover faster when their windows face trees, that crime rates drop in neighborhoods with more greenery, that memory improves when people walk through parks. We don't need to understand the exact chemical recipe to feel its effects. The presence of trees reshapes our biology in ways we are only beginning to measure. But in the forest, the message is clearest. With every breath you take among the trees, you inhale their story, not just oxygen, but information. You are wrapped in their atmosphere, saturated in their slow, deliberate chemistry. And though you may not notice it, your cells do. Your heart knows. Your skin responds. You are being spoken to. And the forest, in its ancient exhaled language, is saying, "Be still. You are part of this. You always have been." In a healthy forest, the language of trees flows with balance. Signals pass quietly underground and through the air, carrying whispers of growth, warnings of pests, and soft pulses of cooperation. Roots exchange sugars and minerals. Leaves shimmer messages in light, and the air is laced with calming terpenes and silent alerts. But when a forest is pushed to the edge, when the rains stop falling, when flames lick at the edges of bark, or when sickness begins to rot the green from within, the tone of that conversation shifts. The network, once tuned for harmony, reconfigures itself for survival. Drought begins as absence, not a sudden event, but a slow withering of the ordinary. Water recedes from the soil, moisture vanishes from the leaves, and the trees, those towering sentinels, begin to change the way they speak. Their roots send fewer signals through the mycorrhizal web, and their stomata, the tiny mouths on their leaves, start to close. This protects them from losing more water, but it also shuts down their capacity to exchange gases. Photosynthesis slows. Growth halts. What was once a fluent exchange of chemical messages becomes fragmented, cautious, and minimal. The underground networks that normally serve as information highways begin to thin. Fungi, too, are affected by drought. Some pull back, retracting their threads, reducing the reach of the trees they support. The entire symbiotic system constricts, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Trees begin to ration their resources, redirecting what little energy they have to their most vital parts. Young seedlings, once fed generously through root connections, may be cut off. Distant relatives are deprioritized. The forest begins to speak in triage. Chemical messages now carry urgency. The composition of volatile compounds shifts. Where once a tree released terpenes to signal mild stress or to attract pollinators, now it sends out a cry of dehydration. These signals can drift on the air to other trees, triggering early defenses. Neighbors start adjusting before visible symptoms appear. Leaves grow smaller, tougher, more leathery. Roots dig deeper, straining for moisture where none may remain. The forest prepares not for growth, but for endurance. And sometimes, not all survive. Trees that can't adapt begin to falter. Their leaves brown and drop, their branches dry and brittle. In their decline, they release a final surge of stress, signals a chemical flare sent through the soil and the wind. Incredibly, this last message can still serve a purpose. Neighboring trees may increase their resistance, alter their root chemistry, or even withdraw from shared fungal networks to avoid being compromised. The dying feed the living one last time, not with nutrients, but with warning. When fire comes, the conversation becomes even more desperate. Flames race faster than any root can respond, faster than signals can travel underground. But trees still try. Some species, like pines and eucalyptus, release thick plumes of resin-rich smoke filled with volatile oils, a kind of explosive punctuation to the forest's speech. Others, scarred by previous burns, may have already laid down chemical memories in their tissues. The soil, too, remembers. After fire, it often becomes infused with new messages: carbon from ash, signals from charred rootlets, and the complex aroma of combustion. The fungi, many of them burned away, begin again from spores buried deep or blown in from distant woods. New conversations rise from the blackened earth. Disease brings yet another shift in tone. Pathogens don't just kill, they change the very dynamics of communication. A sick tree may release signals that confuse its neighbors, either because the disease is manipulating its chemistry or because the tree itself is malfunctioning. Infected tissues might emit false alarms, or worse, silence entirely. The network becomes patchy. Misinformation spreads. Healthy trees begin to isolate themselves, altering root exudates to repel connection. What was once a communal exchange becomes a landscape of suspicion. But even in crisis, the forest remains a system of response. When Dutch elm disease swept through Europe and North America, it devastated entire populations. But some elms resisted. Their immune responses were different. Their communication patterns changed. In some cases, neighboring trees adjusted their own defenses to mimic the resistant ones. And in time, the species began to shift those more responsive, more adaptive, and began to shape the future. The language of survival is not only about avoiding death, it is about translating crisis into memory. And memory, in forests, is chemical. When a tree survives stress, whether drought, fire, or illness, it doesn't return to its old self unchanged. It alters its internal chemistry, sometimes permanently. Proteins are upregulated, signaling pathways stay heightened. This isn't damage, it's preparedness. And through the mycorrhizal network, these changes can influence others. The next generation, germinating nearby, may be born into a world already adapted to threat. The network, under stress, does not collapse. It contracts, recalibrates, and in many cases, evolves. It stops prioritizing abundance and begins to favor resilience. The signals become sharper, more defensive, more specialized, and slowly, as conditions improve, if rain returns, if fire cools, if disease recedes, the forest begins to reopen. Roots reach out again. Fungi recolonize the soil. The air fills with the calmer volatiles of growth. The conversation doesn't resume where it left off. It starts anew, shaped by the memory of what was endured. Even in crisis, the forest speaks, not with panic, but with precision. Its language becomes lean, focused, stripped of excess. Trees don't waste words when life is on the line. They say what matters. And then, if they survive, they remember. High above the crowns of trees, beyond the reach of branches and birds, the air carries more than weather. Invisible to the eye but constant in motion, currents of scent, spores, and microscopic signals drift between continents. These are not merely particles moved by wind. They are fragments of conversation, pieces of forest speech carried across oceans, over deserts, through jet streams that never sleep. A tree in Siberia exhales its chemistry into the sky, and days later, molecules of that breath fall with rain onto moss in Canada. Though separated by half a world, forests are not isolated. They are in dialogue, slow, sweeping, planetary. Pollen is one of the most ancient and persistent forms of these long-distance messages. Carried by breeze, by storm, even by insects riding high-altitude winds, it crosses unimaginable distances. A single pine tree can release millions of grains, each like a whisper launched into the unknown. Some will never land, others will fall into lakes, preserved in layers of sediment for thousands of years. And some just enough will find a home, pollinating distant relatives, crossing genetic lines, reshaping the forest with every successful match. In this way, trees stretch themselves across time and space. Their future selves ride the wind. But pollen is only the beginning. More subtle, and perhaps even more important, are the volatile organic compounds released from forests as a form of atmospheric language. These chemicals rise in pulses, terpenes, isoprenes, and others released in response to temperature, stress, and light. They help trees cool their leaves, fend off attackers, and communicate distress. But once airborne, they don't stop working. They interact with sunlight, forming aerosols that influence cloud formation and rainfall. They nudge weather patterns. They seed the sky. A healthy forest, breathing deeply, contributes not just to its own ecosystem, but to the climate of an entire region. And because these compounds drift, forests that have never met begin to influence one another. The Amazon exhales, and somewhere in West Africa, clouds begin to gather. The boreal forests of the north release their signals, and the Arctic's wind currents shift. This is not coordination in the way animals might plan, but it is still interconnection. Each forest is part of a planetary rhythm, a symphony of breath and evaporation that weaves the green edges of the earth into something whole. Even the soil participates. Spores of fungi, so light they float for miles, rise from leaf litter and ride thermal currents across continents. Some travel as dust, mingling with particles of sand from the Sahara, which itself sails westward each year, settling on the Canopies of South America. In that dust, iron, phosphorus, minerals, but also microbes. And in those microbes, the DNA of organisms, shaped by deserts, now meeting the genes of those born in rainforests. These unlikely migrations nourish the trees, and sometimes change them. A fungus that once lived in the roots of a tree in one hemisphere might find a new partner on the far side of the planet, creating a hybrid network that redefines the chemistry of both. Birds, too, carry messages. As they migrate, they track the pulse of the seasons. They bring seeds in their feathers and droppings, carrying not only plant life but also the microbial companions those seeds need to thrive. Along their paths, they stitch together distant forests, ensuring that no one woodland is truly alone. And when their calls echo at dawn, those sound waves travel through trees tuned to notice change. A forest can tell when the birds are late, when their roots shift, when something in the sky is wrong. Even the oceans are part of this loop. Rivers pull nutrients from forests and feed them into the sea, where plankton bloom in response. In return, sea breezes pick up ions and molecules, returning them to the land with salt-laced rains. In this exchange, forests breathe with the ocean, syncing their life cycles to tides they never see. The rhythms of kelp forests and redwoods mirror each other, not by accident, but through shared patterns in water and light. In this vast system, the earth itself becomes a kind of forest, not in the literal sense of being covered entirely in trees, but in the sense of being woven together by the long-distance language of life. From root tip to canopy, from leaf to cloud, from cloud to coastline, the messages pass, slowly, steadily, relentlessly. When a forest burns in Indonesia, the haze reaches Australia. When beetles devastate pine in British Columbia, the trees scream chemical signals into the air, thick enough to be detected by satellites. When a massive bloom of larch explodes across Siberia, the pollen paints cars yellow in Tokyo. And still, the trees keep breathing. Still, the fungi rise on drafts. Still, the spores cross hemispheres. The conversation never stops. And in this global web, humans are not merely observers. We are participants, whether we notice or not. We plant trees that did not grow here, and in doing so, introduce new voices to the choir. We cut forests, changing the chemical profile of the air above them. We breathe the exhalations of distant woods, and they breathe ours. The molecules in your lungs right now, some of them may have passed through the stomata of a cedar in Japan, a eucalyptus in Australia, a sequoia in California. You are not apart from this. You are threaded into it. To see the earth this way is to see a living conversation that spans the planet, spoken in vapor and spore, in pollen and wind. The tempo is slow, the words unspoken, but the message is unmistakable. Everything is listening, everything responds, and every forest, no matter how distant, echoes through. The others like a breath passed from one body to the next. Beneath the calm facade of the forest, beneath the filtered light and dappled shadows, the roots do not always play fair. The vast network that connects tree to tree, species to species, is not just a structure of harmony. It is also a place of strategy, of advantage, of choice, and sometimes of betrayal. The forest may seem like a cathedral of peace, but its foundation is a living system, and like any living system, it holds room for selfishness. Among the many voices whispering through the soil, not all speak in kindness. Some take more than they give. There are trees, clever, adaptive, opportunistic, that tap into the mycorrhizal network, drawing in nutrients and information, but refusing to share their own. Scientists call them cheaters, though they do not cheat by human design. They survive by consuming the generosity of others without reciprocating. A ghost-pipe plant, pale and rootless, offers no sugar, no sunlight, no mineral in return, and yet it feeds from the roots of nearby trees through a fungal bridge, its thin stem trembling like something caught between realms. Other plants, too, abandon photosynthesis. Some orchids, some vines, even certain shrubs have found ways to bypass the labor of growing their own food. They siphon it instead from the fungi, from the trees, from the network that never expected to be used this way. They are guests who sneak into the pantry and leave before morning, and the forest does not punish them. It endures. Among the trees themselves, cooperation is the rule, but not the law. Some species form alliances only with their own kind, forming isolated islands of resource sharing. Others hoard. There are individuals that grow fast, with shallow roots and greedy branches, pulling more than their share of sunlight and carbon, extracting nutrients from the network at a rate that leaves their neighbors hungry. In crowded forests, competition for light is brutal, and the winners may not be the wisest, but the quickest. Their success, built on the backs of others, tips the balance of the system. They grow tall, and the forest beneath them dims. And yet, the fungi persist. Mycorrhizal networks are not immune to manipulation, but they are not passive either. Some fungi sever their ties to cheater plants, redirecting their resources elsewhere. Others adapt by forming selective connections, preferring those trees that offer a rich exchange of sugars and minerals. There is choice here, guided not by morality, but by chemistry. A tree that gives more gets more. A fungus that connects wisely survives longer. The network shifts to favor mutualism. But even in this adjustment, cheaters remain. Every system has its loopholes. More insidious still are the parasites. Certain fungi do not seek exchange. They invade. The honey fungus, for instance, spreads in the dark with a deceptive grace. Its filaments slip between bark and cambium, strangling trees from the inside. It glows faintly at night, a ghost beneath the bark, and it can live for thousands of years. One organism, miles wide, feeding on death. And yet, it is part of the forest too. It clears the old, it makes room for the new. Parasitic plants like mistletoe embed themselves in branches, stealing water and nutrients while producing their own green leaves, a half-hearted attempt at independence. They ride the wind and the birds to new hosts, embedding like whispers into the vascular tissue of their victims. And when the host weakens, others take advantage. Insects, pathogens, rot. One betrayal opens the door to many. But if the forest contains betrayal, it also contains recovery. Cooperation does not disappear because some choose another path. In fact, it becomes more valuable. Mother trees still send carbon to their young. Fungi still shuttle messages from tree to tree. In damaged woods, researchers have observed a strange phenomenon. Networks rebuilding, not around the strongest trees, but around the most generous. In places where fire or disease has swept through, the survivors that share their resources most freely often become the anchors of new life. Their roots hum with traffic. Their branches shelter seedlings that are not their own. This does not mean the forest is fair. It means the forest is dynamic. It adjusts. It learns. It does not eliminate those who bend the rules, but it remembers. Chemical memories shape the choices of future connections. A root touched once by a greedy partner may avoid contact next season. A fungus that feeds a parasite may alter its protein signals to mask its presence. Slowly, subtly, the network corrects itself. Conflict and cooperation weave together into something more complex than either alone. The forest is not a utopia. It is not a battlefield. It is a negotiation, unfolding over centuries. What looks like harmony is, in truth, a constant balancing act. Trees and fungi and shrubs and parasites all navigating the invisible wires of survival. Each decision written in carbon, in nitrogen, in scent and silence. And beneath your feet, that web is alive, stretching, contracting, choosing. The same root that feeds its neighbor today may retract tomorrow. The fungus that connects two allies this year may abandon them in the next. The ghost pipe may bloom, translucent and hungry, drawing life it did not earn, and still, somewhere nearby, a seedling will rise, fed by a stranger. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. In the heart of an ancient forest, time moves differently, not in hours or seasons, but in epochs and echoes. Here, in the hushed spaces between roots and bark, there are trees that remember. Not in the way animals do, no neurons, no conscious recall, but in a deeper, more elemental fashion. Their bodies are written with memory. A ring of dark wood speaks of a drought that came and lingered. A scar beneath the bark remembers fire. Their leaves, their chemistry, their behavior, all are shaped by what came before. A tree that has survived 100 summers does not respond to the sun as a sapling does. It has learned restraint. It knows the warning signs of heat waves that mean more than warmth. Its stomata, those tiny mouths on its leaves, may close faster, conserve moisture earlier, avoid risk with a patience younger trees do not yet possess. This is not instinct. It is not choice. It is the residue of experience, stored in vascular tissue and cambial shifts in the molecular architecture of survival. During drought, trees do not simply wither. They adjust their internal chemistry. They produce protective compounds, shift how they allocate carbon, even alter the sensitivity of their roots to trace minerals. And when the rains return, not everything resets. Some of that internal change stays. Scientists have found that trees exposed to repeated stress events begin to show altered responses, faster reactions, more efficient use of resources. In their rings and resins, droughts leave fingerprints. Fire leaves stories. In one study, researchers examined trees that had survived past wildfires. When exposed to smoke years later, only the scent, not the flame. These trees responded with a subtle cascade of defenses, changes in leaf production, shifts in hormone levels, even an uptick in terpene emission, those aromatic molecules that double as chemical shields. They remembered what danger smelled like, and they acted, not in panic, but with the kind of quiet preparation only age can afford. But this memory is not locked in the elders alone. It spreads. Through roots, through fungal filaments, through shared chemistry, the lessons of the old can be passed to the young. Seedlings growing in the shadow of ancient trees often show unusual resilience, not because their genetics are different, but because they are nourished by roots that have known hardship. Mycorrhizal networks vary more than nutrients. They carry signals, traces of past stress, encoded in carbon ratios and hormonal cues. A young sapling, freshly sprouted, may already be fluent in the language of survival if it is raised within reach of an elder's roots. And the memories shape not only responses to harm, but also the rhythm of growth itself. Trees that once faced long winters or short summers may time their budding and leaf drop differently, even generations later. This is epigenetics, changes in gene expression triggered by environment, passed down not in DNA sequence, but in chemical tags that linger like frost on a window pane. They do not alter the song, but they change how loudly the notes are sung. A tree born in a warming climate might still carry the cold of its ancestors in its veins. There is elegance in how this memory accumulates. No single drought, no single fire or storm defines the tree, but layer by layer, season by season, the record is laid down. In the rings, wide and narrow, you can read feast and famine. In the resins, hardened and amber-like, you find the signatures of battles fought with beetles and blight. In the isotopes of oxygen and carbon embedded in cellulose, you hear the whispers of past climates, the breath of ages sealed in wood. Some trees, like the bristlecone pine, carry this memory for thousands of years. One such tree in the White Mountains of California has been alive since before the pyramids were built. Each year, it adds a new ring, thin and precise, recording not only its own struggle, but the conditions of the world around it. And though its needles are sparse and its form twisted by wind, it remains alert. It continues to respond, not as something ancient and forgotten, but as something ancient and aware. Even fallen trees do not forget. A log decomposing on the forest floor becomes part of the memory bank, feeding fungi and insects whose populations rise and fall in patterns shaped by the tree's final years. These organisms, in turn, influence the soil that cradles the next generation. Decay becomes a form of instruction. The dead teach the living not by words, but by structure, not by thought, but by consequence. And so, a forest becomes more than a collection of organisms. It becomes a memory palace, a living archive. Each tree, each root, each mycelial strand contributes to the shared recollection of the land. When fire returns, the forest does not start from zero. When drought arrives, it is not the first. The system has seen it before. It has adapted, adjusted, prepared. To walk in an old forest is to step into the mind of the earth, not a mind that thinks as we do, but one that remembers with its body. The quiet there is not emptiness, it is concentration. The stillness is not stagnation, it is attention. Every leaf that trembles, every trunk that leans, every shadow that falls across fern and moss is part of a narrative written over centuries. We often imagine trees as passive, rooted witnesses to the passage of time. But they are more than that. They are participants. They record. They respond. And when we stand among them, breathing the air they shape, walking paths they shade, We are not just moving through space, we are moving through memory. Above the canopy, where green becomes sky and sky becomes breath, forests reach farther than we once imagined. Not just upward with branches or outward with roots, but into the atmosphere itself. For centuries, we thought of trees as passive, shaped by climate but never shaping it in return. Yet forests are not just responders to weather, they are creators of it. Silent engineers of the atmosphere, using moisture, chemistry, and heat to write invisible patterns across the sky. Where there is forest, there is rain. And where trees vanish, often, so does the water. Every leaf is a doorway. During the day, trees inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen, but they also release water vapor through tiny pores called stomata. This process, called transpiration, isn't a mere byproduct of life. It's an atmospheric force. A single mature tree can release hundreds of liters of water into the air each day. Multiply that by the millions in a rainforest, and the numbers swell into rivers of vapor, forming what scientists call flying rivers, columns of moist air rising above the canopy and flowing over continents. These are not clouds yet, but they are the ingredients of clouds, drifting with the winds until they cool and condense. In the Amazon, for example, these airborne rivers carry moisture thousands of kilometers, helping to drive rainfall not only in South America, but in parts of Africa and even the southern United States. The trees create their own rain, then send some of it elsewhere. Remove enough forest, and the cycle begins to collapse. Droughts become longer. Rain arrives too late or not at all. Without the trees to call down the rain, the skies begin to forget how. But it's not only vapor that matters. Forests are chemical factories. As leaves photosynthesize and metabolize, they release volatile organic compounds, terpenes, isoprene, and a whole suite of mysterious aromatics. These molecules rise into the air and react with sunlight and other particles, forming tiny aerosols. These microscopic bits serve as cloud condensation nuclei, the scaffolding around which water droplets form. Without them, clouds remain thin, unable to gather themselves into rain. With them, the skies darken, thicken, and sometimes break open. Trees, in their own quiet way, are rainmakers. Some species are more active than others. Pine forests, with their resin-rich needles, release vast quantities of terpenes, giving them their distinctive scent. That piney aroma we associate with cleanliness or calm is, in fact, a cloud-forming chemical. And the denser the forest, the more pronounced the effect. In summer, satellite images show a haze above boreal forests. Not pollution, but the visible breath of trees, thick with natural particles that alter the very albedo of the earth. This chemical skywriting doesn't stop with clouds. It affects temperature too. By increasing cloud cover, forests can reflect more sunlight, cooling the land below. In humid regions, trees transpire so much water that they essentially act as evaporative air conditioners. Cut down a forest, and what once was cool becomes searing. In cities, this effect is stark. Shaded areas can be up to 10 degrees cooler than those exposed. But on a planetary scale, the stakes are even higher. Forests don't just stabilize local climates, they moderate global ones. There's another layer, still the role of forests in creating pressure systems. As trees release moisture, that vapor rises and cools, leading to condensation and eventually rainfall. But this cooling also lowers atmospheric pressure locally, drawing in more moist air from surrounding regions. It's a self-reinforcing loop, like a breath that pulls in more air with every exhale. Some scientists believe this mechanism helps explain how rainfall remains consistent in large tropical forests, even when conditions around them grow drier. The trees are sustaining their own weather, linked not only by roots, but by sky. These interactions are subtle, layered, and often invisible. Yet they form the circulatory system of the planet's weather. And they are not uniform. Each forest has its own atmospheric fingerprint. A mangrove swamp influences wind differently than a redwood grove. A savanna's trees pulse moisture in a different rhythm than those of a cloud forest. Together, these biomes form a patchwork of weather voices, regional dialects in a planetary conversation about temperature, wind, and rain. And like all conversations, this one can be interrupted. Deforestation doesn't just remove trees. It silences the vapor trails, the aerosols, the tiny engines of rain. In parts of Southeast Asia and Central America, researchers have found that once forest loss reaches a tipping point, regional rainfall drops dramatically. Sometimes it doesn't return. The land becomes locked in a new, drier state, not because the clouds refuse to come, but because no one is calling them anymore. The trees that once whispered to the sky have been cut down, their language forgotten. But this knowledge offers something rare, a chance to listen better, a chance to replant not just for carbon, not just for beauty, but for climate memory, for rainfall, for the breath of the sky. Trees are not mere carbon sponges. They are weather makers, cloud callers, air shapers. They remember how to summon storms, how to cool the sun's harsh touch, how to seed the rain for miles beyond their shade. To walk through a forest, then, is not only to be among the living, it is to be beneath a weather engine, humming with unseen purpose. Every leaf above is an antenna, every branch a signal, tower, and every root that draws water from the ground is, in turn, helping lift it back toward the clouds. The next time you see a storm roll in, consider this. It may have begun with a tree, a breath released into the air, high and invisible, carrying not just water but a message the forest asking the sky to speak back. Deep in the stillness of the forest, where the only sounds seem to be the shuffle of leaves or the rustle of wind through branches, something else is speaking, not in words or whispers, not in anything the human ear can detect unaided, but there, embedded in the living tissue of trees, is a hidden voice. Not silence, but a spectrum of communication far above our hearing. Clicks, pops, pulses, a language measured in vibration, not breath. This is the sound of sap under pressure, of roots signaling distress, of trunks stretching so slowly they hum. For decades, we assumed that trees were quiet, that their lives played out in hush and stillness, too slow for story, too silent for sound. But then came the sensors, ultra-sensitive microphones, accelerometers, devices built to listen beyond what we could hear, and with them came discovery. In greenhouses and forests, under stress and in peace, trees began to speak not metaphorically, but literally. They emit bursts of ultrasonic noise, especially when dehydrated or wounded. These are not cries in any human sense, but they are signals, consistent and measurable. They suggest response. They suggest presence. When water flows through a tree, it moves not in open channels but in narrow tubes, pulled upward by the evaporation of moisture from the leaves. This chain of molecules, linked in tension from root to canopy, is fragile. When drought strikes or roots can't pull enough water from the soil, gaps form in that chain. Air bubbles, cavitations. Each one creates a tiny, sharp acoustic event, a pop in the xylem, a sound like a bubble snapping in a straw, but on a microscopic level. Multiplied across thousands of vessels, these clicks become a symphony of strain. To the tree, this is not just noise, it is a message to itself, a biochemical flag that something is wrong. Studies have shown that in response to this internal acoustic signature, trees begin to alter their behavior. They close their stomata to conserve water. They reallocate sugars. They shift their metabolism to a drought-tolerant mode. The sounds are not just consequences, they are triggers, a form of internal language. But some researchers suspect these clicks may travel farther. In controlled experiments, Neighboring plants exposed to the ultrasonic emissions of a dehydrated peer begin to change as well, even without any shared soil or mycorrhizal network. Something in the air, a vibration in the leaf or stem, prompts a response, a readiness, as if the plants are not only speaking to themselves, but listening to each other. The voice of a tree is not just internal, it is ambient. In the root zones, the story continues. Roots don't just grow blindly, they follow gradients of moisture, of nutrients, and, it seems, of sound. In laboratory tests, roots exposed to low-frequency vibrations begin to curve toward the source. They are drawn to it, as if seeking a familiar tone. This suggests that roots are not only capable of detecting vibration, but that they use it as a navigational tool. And in the complex weave of soil, where roots and fungi and stones all press against one another, vibration may be the most reliable signal of all. What fascinates researchers is how structured these sounds can be. They are not random noise, but patterned, variable in frequency and rate, depending on the species, the environment, and the stressor. Some trees emit more sounds when cut. Others click faster in high temperatures. The pattern is data, and we are only beginning to understand how to read it. There may be nuance here. Emotion, perhaps not in the human sense, but as kind of physiological inflection, urgency, contentment, fatigue. These may be written in waveform. Imagine, then, a forest not as a silent cathedral, but as an orchestra, always playing just in frequencies we cannot hear. The swaying of trunks, the bending of branches, even the expansion of cells during growth, all generate vibrations. At night, when winds still and animals sleep, the trees continue their song. In the darkness, sap rises slowly and then falls. Roots pulse. Leaves tremble with changes in humidity. And deep in the wood, minute acoustic events form a low and constant rhythm and the heartbeat of photosynthesis. There are traditions, ancient ones, that speak of trees as having voices, not metaphorically but literally. Shamans who claim they can hear a forest's mood, monks who meditate in groves to listen to the woods. We once dismissed these ideas as poetic or superstitious. Now, with sensors and data and decibels, we find something unexpected. The forest. There was never silent. We simply lacked the tools to hear it. And now that we can, a new door opens. Acoustic ecology, the study of sound in ecosystems, is helping scientists monitor tree health without cutting them open. A sensor placed on the bark can now tell you if a tree is thirsty, or damaged, or stressed. These vibrations act as early warning systems, enabling us to respond before leaves wilt or canopies thin. Listening, it turns out, is healing. There is a kind of humility in all this. To know that we walked for centuries through forests believing them quiet, when in fact, they were always humming. To realize that silence is often just a measure of our own perception, not the world's activity. And that even something as seemingly inert as bark holds echoes of water and tension and growth. Some researchers are even experimenting with translating tree sounds into human audible frequencies. The results are strange and beautiful tiny clicks layered into ambient compositions, sonic landscapes that evoke rain and pulse and breath. When we slow them down and pitch them into our range, they sound like distant chimes or soft knocks on hollow wood, like a forest tapping out Morse code in the dark. What are the trees saying? We may never know in the way we understand speech, but we can know that they are saying something, that in every leaf, every trunk, every root, there is vibration, a voice, not of words, but of resonance, a frequency of life. And in that voice, perhaps, is something we've long forgotten, the idea that communication doesn't begin with speaking, it begins with listening. After fire sweeps through a woodland, or a storm splinters a canopy into ruin, the silence that follows can feel final. Charred trunks lean like broken pillars. Ash smothers the soil. What once whispered with birdsong and wind now lies stunned, skeletal, and still. To the human eye, it looks like loss. To the forest, it is also a beginning. Forests do not perish in silence. They reorganize. Beneath the ruin, life begins to stir again, not with haste, but with quiet purpose. The first responders are not what you might expect, not deer nosing through blackened underbrush or seeds dropped by birds. The earliest agents of repair are older than animals, older even than the trees themselves. They are fungi. The ancient mycorrhizal networks, hidden in the soil, reach outward like a nervous system, remembering how to move. Though some filaments may have burned, many others survive underground, insulated by layers of earth, dormant but not dead. From these threads, the forest begins to rewire itself. In the absence of canopy, sunlight hits the soil for the first time in decades. Spores long buried wake from sleep, sparked by light and heat. Pioneer fungi spread quickly, bridging the gap between severed roots, reconnecting the torn pathways of the wood wide web. They seek out surviving trees, stumps with hidden reserves, saplings, singed but not destroyed, and begin to repair the broken circuits. Where roots once exchanged sugars and messages, the flow resumes, tentative but vital. This is not the return of what was, but the building of what might be. Some fungi specialize in wounds. They creep over damaged bark, filling cracks with delicate hyphae that seal and stitch. Others invade rot, breaking down what has died so that nutrients can be reabsorbed by the living. A fallen trunk is not an endpoint, but a donation. Its carbon, nitrogen, and minerals leach slowly into the ecosystem, brokered by decomposers that translate death into renewal. The very process of decay becomes a kind of healing, slow, fragrant, and full of invisible industry. Trees, too, respond. Where a limb has been lost, cambium tissue begins to thicken, wrapping the wound in layers like scar tissue. At the edges of bark torn by lightning or gnawed by beetles, chemical defenses surge, sealing exposed wood from further invasion. But, more remarkably, trees can sometimes graft their roots to others nearby, even if the connection was not there before. A dying tree might send its final sugars into the soil, where another root accepts them. Not all species can do this, but enough can that entire groves may persist long after individual members have fallen, bound together by these emergency alliances. Even stumps, long considered lifeless, are often kept alive for years by their neighbors. Sugars delivered through shared root systems maintain their tissues, preventing decay, preserving memory. It's as if the forest refuses to let go of a voice, keeping it just barely alive until the network is ready to grow again. New seedlings sprout where old giants once stood. Some emerge from cones or nuts opened by the heat of the fire itself, serotinous species that require destruction to unlock their future. Others lie dormant in the soil, waiting years for their moment. Fungi find these newcomers first, offering mycorrhizal partnerships as soon as roots touch earth. Within days, the seedling is plugged into the network, nourished by the very decay that cleared its path. There is no isolation in this growth. From the start, each tree is part of something larger. Even in landscapes scarred by human hands, clear-cut forests, stripped hillsides, polluted soil, this pattern persists. Given time and space, mycorrhizal webs begin to form again. Saplings find each other. Pioneer species rise first, fast-growing and resilient. Beneath their shade, slower trees establish deeper roots. The fungal networks expand with them, branching like rivers underground, seeking out old connections, forging new ones. It is not instant. Sometimes it takes decades, sometimes centuries, but the direction is always toward repair. What's most extraordinary is how much of this healing happens without any central control. There is no conductor, no master plan, only responses, signals, feedback loops that span. species, and kingdoms. A tree sends more sugar to a struggling neighbor. A fungus reroutes nutrients around a damaged area. A network compensates for loss by growing denser, more redundant. It is not a single mind, but a collective intelligence, not conscious, but complex. We once thought of forests as collections of individuals, trees standing side by side, competing for light and water. Now we understand them as communities, interconnected, responsive, capable of memory and cooperation, and, perhaps most humbling of all, capable of regeneration that transcends any single organism. The death of a tree may mark the beginning of 100 new lives. To walk through a recovering forest is to witness this quiet miracle. You see seedlings sprouting in the shadows of the fallen. You notice shelf fungi blooming from stumps like living punctuation. You hear the return of birdsong, tentative at first, then bold. Even the scent of the air shifts from the acrid tang of ash to the rich, earthy musk of rebirth. The forest never forgets what it was, but it doesn't try to go back. It builds something new, root by root, spore by spore. And in doing so, it reminds us that healing is not the same as restoration. It is something deeper, something that grows in the aftermath of pain, shaped by what came before, but not bound to it. A slow, persistent, reaching toward wholeness, even after everything has burned. In the stillness beneath a forest floor, something ancient hums without wires, without screens, without any circuitry we would recognize, and yet it shares uncanny parallels with the technology that powers our modern world. Beneath roots and stone, beyond sight and nearly beyond belief, the trees are speaking, not with words, but through a vast network of signals, flows, and choices. This is the Wood Wide Web, a name that began as metaphor, and over time began to seem like something more. Not a clever comparison, but an insight, an invitation to rethink not only nature, but ourselves. When we look at forests now, with microscopes and sensors, with algorithms that map the spread of fungal filaments underground, what we find is not randomness, but pattern, not chaos, but system. Trees and fungi forming networks, not unlike those we build with fiber optics and cloud computing. Decentralized, redundant, intelligent. Each tree is like a server, storing energy, receiving input, and redistributing it to others. Each node is aware of its neighbors, and what affects one ripples across the system. But unlike our digital world, no tree is master. No command center controls the flow. Instead, the network operates on cooperation, balance, and feedback. We used to think intelligence required a brain. Then we thought it required speed. Now, in the slow pulses of sugar and chemical signals that flow from root to root, a new kind of awareness is being recognized. It is not the rapid-fire logic of silicon chips. It is not conscious, but it is responsive. Fungi detect which tree is sending sugars and which one is starving. Nutrients flow not to the biggest or strongest, but to those most in need. Patterns emerge not programmed, but grown, and they resemble the logic of distributed systems that we ourselves are only beginning to fully understand. In human networks, we design redundancy to ensure that if one server fails, the others can take over. Forests do this naturally. If one tree is cut, the network reroutes. If fire severs part of the fungal web, the rest continues, expanding outward until the connection is restored. The resilience comes not from any single node, but from the strength of the whole. The logic is not domination, but connection. There are even data packets, in a way, chemical signals sent through roots, and hyphae carry messages: danger, disease, drought. These are detected, interpreted, and often responded to. A birch under attack by insects might warn its neighbors through scent in the air and signal in the soil. And the neighbors, in turn, boost their chemical defenses before the threat arrives. The communication is not direct like speech or coding, but it works not in seconds, but in seasons. Compare this to how our own systems try to model intelligence now. We build neural networks that learn from pattern. We attempt to replicate cognition by mimicking the way brains and systems respond to data. But perhaps the forest is a different kind of teacher, one not built on central command, but on mutual adaptation. A tree does not hoard its excess. It shares because it is linked. The whole thrives when each part is supported. And there is a lesson in speed. In our networks, faster is always better. More bandwidth, more processing power, more results in less time. But in the forest, speed is not the priority. Signals can take hours or days to move through the roots. The slowness is part of the wisdom. Time is part of the message. A delay allows for reflection, for layered response. Trees do not rush. They endure. This model of cooperation challenges some of our most basic assumptions. That competition is natural, that the strong survive by suppressing the weak. But in the wood wide web, it's not the most aggressive trees that dominate. It's the ones that participate in the system, that give as much as they receive. Those are the ones that persist, that become part of the forest's memory, that send their information and nutrients into the next generation, not as inheritance, but as infrastructure. Even the failures teach something. There are trees that take without giving, fungal parasites that intercept the flow and offer nothing in return. But they rarely last long. The system learns, roots change, the energy shifts elsewhere. Just as in our networks, where spam and exploitation must be filtered, the forest filters too, not by deletion, but by realignment. And what's most beautiful is how these networks emerge organically. No blueprint, no engineer, just mutual need and shared space. The forest learns itself into being, and once learned, it remembers. Old root paths are reopened years later. Fungi return to hosts they haven't seen in decades. The map is flexible, alive. There is humility in realizing that what we've built in recent decades, the cloud, the internet, the smart grid, echoes something that forests have done for over 400 million years. And while our tools are fragile, subject to power outages and server crashes, the wood wide web persists even under fire, flood, and frost. It can pause, but it does not forget. Imagine, for a moment, designing a city like a forest, with networks that distribute not just data, but care, with systems that adapt to stress by helping the most vulnerable first, with memory that is chemical and shared, not hoarded in private caches. It's not utopia, it's biology. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: intelligence is not always a thing that thinks. Sometimes it's a pattern that holds, a rhythm of give and take, an awareness that flows, shared by many, owned by none. And in the dark soil beneath our feet, this intelligence is humming, slow, silent, and wise. In quiet labs and shaded forests, something extraordinary is unfolding. Researchers with sensors and algorithms are listening not just to birdsong or breeze, but to the trees themselves, tuning in to a language we've long ignored, now made audible through the fusion of biology and technology. The whispers of roots, the murmurs of leaves, the clicks of sap moving through xylem, all once dismissed as background noise, are now being mapped, measured, and translated. The future of tree communication is no longer just myth or metaphor. It's a science taking shape in real time. At the heart of this exploration are machines built to hear what we cannot. Tiny electrodes embedded in soil register faint voltage shifts as roots reach and retreat. Accelerometers strapped to trunks detect micro vibrations caused by wind or internal water movement. Specialized microphones pick up ultrasonic clicks emitted by stressed plants, sounds that never pierce human hearing, but which some insects and fungi may already understand. These clicks, once thought meaningless, now hint at urgency. When a tree is cut or starved for water, it makes more of them. The frequency changes, the rhythm alters. In some experiments, neighboring plants respond closing stomata, altering their chemistry, as if bracing for an event they cannot see but can somehow sense. What was once silence now sounds suspiciously like a signal. Some researchers call it bioacoustics, others call it plant phonetics. But no matter the name, the result is the same. We are beginning to decode an ancient form of communication, not built on lungs or tongues, but on pressure, chemistry, and wave. A vocabulary not spoken aloud, but felt and transmitted through the tissues of the living. In Europe, high-resolution imaging systems trace the flow of sugars and minerals through trees with astonishing precision, like veins fluorescing under light. In Japan, AI models are trained on thousands of time-lapse sequences, learning to predict how plants will respond to heat, drought, or touch, not just physiologically, but socially, if such a word can apply to beings without minds. And in Canada, entire groves are wired into networks of sensors, creating digital twins of forests, where every interaction from carbon exchange to root signal is logged and visualized. This is not science fiction. It is observation sharpened by curiosity and code. Some of the most promising work comes not from treating trees as individuals, but from modeling them as nodes in a system, a network not unlike the internet. Researchers are using tools developed for traffic flow, swarm intelligence, and even social media analytics to study how information moves between trees. Which species are most central? Which serve as hubs? Do certain trees amplify messages while others simply pass them along? The answers hint at a structure more sophisticated than we imagined. AI is central to these discoveries. Algorithms trained on vast ecological data sets can identify subtle patterns in how trees share nutrients or emit signals, teasing out a grammar that might otherwise take lifetimes to notice. Some models even attempt to classify different types of tree speech. A stress signal from dehydration might sound very different, chemically or electrically, than one triggered by pests. Over time, machine learning could help us develop a working dictionary, not of words, but of intentions and responses. But with each new insight comes a deeper humility. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we've missed. Forests have been communicating in these ways for hundreds of millions of years, long before humans ever noticed. Theirs is a language not made for speed or clarity, but for resonance and longevity. They speak in cycles and seasons, not seconds. Their memory is written in growth rings and soil chemistry, not silicon. Still, technology allows us to bridge that gap. In Australia, a team is developing wearable devices for farmers that alert them when trees on their land begin to signal stress, a kind of early warning system for drought or disease, delivered directly from the plants themselves. In Brazil, bioacoustic sensors placed deep in the Amazon are being used to track deforestation, not by sound of chainsaws, but by absence when the trees stop speaking. The silence is its own alarm. These tools could reshape conservation. Imagine reforesting not by planting rows of saplings in empty soil, but by introducing them gradually into existing fungal and root networks, guided by sensors that confirm connection, or monitoring climate change not only through satellite images and temperature graphs, but through changes in the chemical conversations of entire biomes. What if we could tell how a forest feels? But perhaps the most profound possibility is philosophical. As science strips away the illusion of plant silence, it invites us to listen differently, not just with machines, but with attention. To recognize the forest not as scenery, but as participant. Not background, but chorus. Already, some researchers have begun to speak of trees as relational beings, not because they think or choose in the way we do, but because they exist through interaction. Their lives are shaped not just by sun and soil, but by each other, and now, by us. The future of tree communication research may one day give us a true translator, a tool that lets us eavesdrop on the living world to understand when a forest is anxious or generous or calm. But even without that, we are being taught a different kind of literacy, one that doesn't rely on voice, but on signal, one that doesn't require language to understand care. In the rustle of leaves and the hush of moss, in the whisper of sap and the shimmer of scent, the message has always been there. Now, at last, we're learning to listen. You walk through the forest and think you are alone. Feet on damp leaves, breath misting in the cool air, the quiet around you feels still, untouched, as if the trees are merely witnesses to your passing. But the stillness is not emptiness. It is depth. It is presence. And you are not alone. Every step you take presses into a living network beneath the soil, a weave of roots and fungi and memory. Every breath you draw passes through the lungs of a forest, and though the trees do not speak with words, they feel you. They know you are here. This is not poetry. It is pattern. It is biology. It is the chemistry of shared life, pulsing from root to root, leaf to lung, soil to skin. The forest is not something outside you, not a place you visit and leave behind. It is something you are part of, woven into, cell by cell. You breathe in the oxygen that leaves have made. You breathe out the carbon they require. There is no edge to this exchange. It is constant. It is communion. Somewhere beneath your feet, a root twitches. A mycelial strand stretches. A signal moves, slow and steady, unnoticed but real. The trees have noticed the change in temperature. They have felt the press of your footsteps. And though they do not recognize you as a deer, or a storm, or a rival tree, they feel the difference. The forest tracks presence. It holds memory. And now, for a moment, you are part of that record. When you sit beneath a tree and feel calm, it is not your imagination. The air around you is charged with the breath of the forest, tiny molecules called phytoncides, released by bark and leaf, shaping the immune systems of animals, reducing heart rates in humans. You are altered by their presence, calmed, grounded, made quiet, not just in thought, but in blood. You are not simply observing the forest. You are participating in it. Even in cities, you are never far from this connection. The wooden frame of a door, the page of a book, the fruit on a table, all carry the long memory of trees. Each was part of this great cycle once, grown by sunlight, shaped by wind, linked to others in silence before it was shaped into something human. The network echoes on, even in altered form. And when you walk in a park or touch a tree along a street, something in you recognizes the rhythm, the slow, wide patience of things that grow. Your body is not separate from this rhythm. Your skin was shaped by the air of forests. Your bones carry minerals filtered from ancient soils. Your blood holds trace elements once shared by roots and rain. And your thoughts, though quick, electric, impatient, are not so different from the long, slow awareness of trees. You too respond to your environment. You too store memory and biology. You too are shaped by what you share and what you hold back. In a forest, everything is relationship. Nothing thrives alone. The strongest trees are not those that grow fastest or tallest, but those that are most deeply connected. That share sugars with the young, that lean into the fungal threads and trade resources when the light fades or the frost comes early. These trees do not compete so much as cooperate. They do not hoard. They contribute, and they thrive, not through isolation, but through mutual aid. There is wisdom here. In our own systems, we often forget this. We build networks of information, but not always of care. We value independence, forgetting that everything alive is dependent. But the forest remembers. It remembers how to support, how to signal, how to shift in response to danger or change. It remembers that strength comes not from standing apart, but from reaching out. You are a part of this remembering. Even when you leave the forest, some of it comes with you. The smell in your hair, the texture in your lungs, the calm in your chest, the molecules of bark and fern, the spores too small to see, the quiet that lingers in your thoughts. All of it is communication, a conversation continued, and perhaps, in some way we cannot yet measure, the forest remembers you too. There is something beautiful in knowing that you are not only walking through a network, but contributing to it. Your breath nourishes leaves, your footsteps stir soil. Your very presence reminds the system that life is still here, still moving, still connected. You are not outside nature looking in. You are nature becoming aware of itself. So next time you enter the woods, walk gently. Listen, not with your ears, but with your attention. Let the forest speak in its own time in scent and shadow, in warmth and wind. Let it tell you what it knows. Let it tell you what it remembers. Let it welcome you not as visitor, but as kin. Because in the end, you are not just in the forest. You are part of the forest, and it is part of you.